Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're just going to select the ball. Still got my grid on here, and what we're going to do is just add a little bit of stretch and squash. Now, depending on the speed and also the distance that's traveled and the force, the pressure that's on this ball when it's traveling, is going to really dictate how much squash and stretch. So if the ball is moving quite quickly and there's going to be and it's hitting the ground quite firmly, quite hard, then we're going to add more pressure to it. So what I'm going to do is, first off, at the top of every bounce, I need to save this shape, because at the moment, if we have a look, I don't have any scale values. All I've got at the moment that's saved is this up and down. So what that means is if I start to stretch and squash this ball, let's say that we go to this point here and I squash it down and I scale it out and I drop it down again so it's touching the ground. If we have a look at these channels here, you'll notice that it's really just going to stay like that now until we add another scale value. And so what we really want is we want at the top of every bounce, we need it to go back to its default. So I'm just going to undo, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, so that I have this shape. And what we're going to do here is I'm going to save the scale at the top of the bounce. So I actually like at the top of each bounce that value. So I'm going to come over here to the channels and I'm just going to select the scale Z, Y, and X, and then you notice that I'm actually just doing that. I'm doing that by selecting the words. I'm not selecting these values here. I'm just selecting those, and then right mouse click and just say key selected. And what that'll do is it's going to save that shape. Okay, at that frame. So at the top of every bounce, just go ahead and right mouse click so that when we start scaling it, it will always go back to that nice round sphere at the top of its bounce. Okay, now I probably don't have to do the whole lot. I might as well actually. You know what? I'm just going to go all the way to the end and I'm just going to hit that, because we're really only going to start deforming the shape of this ball on the first 4 or 5 bounces. Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm just going to go to the first bounce where it's making contact with the ground, and we're going to hotkey R to add a little bit of scale, and going to push it down and just a little bit. Okay, and then also make sure that the bottom of the ball is on the ground there, and the frame before, at frame 8, I'm just going to go ahead and add a little bit of stretch and then also scale it in just a little bit, and then at frame 10 I'm going to stretch it out again and push it in. So what I've done is it's at its normal shape, and then it gets a little bit stretched on the way down, it squashes, and then it scales up. Okay, now at the top of the bounce it goes back to its normal shape. So now you can see why we actually had to save, right mouse click and save all of these values at the top of the bounce so that it could actually animate back to that. Okay, and then we'll do the same thing. I'm just going to add a little bit of squash on the contact point, and then I'll just drag this down a little bit, and we'll do the same thing the previous frame. I'm going to add a little bit of stretch, just a hint of it, and we'll squash it in. So it's like that. Do the same thing as it's bouncing up. We want it to be nice and stretched again. Not too much. With every bounce it's going to become less and less. So over here you can see I've got my the scale Z open, and with each bounce now, when it's making contact with the ground, I'm just going to have it do a little bit of squash, because the energy is decreasing with every bounce. And then I'll go back to the previous frame, go back into scale, add a little bit of stretch, okay, and then do the same thing the frame after, add a little bit of stretch, and we'll just see how that goes. Okay, goes back. This one here, I'm going to add, this will probably be the last one. I'm just going to do one or two more. I'll do one more. This will be the last one for this on frame 57 for now. If I wanted to, I can go back in and fix it if I feel the need. But at this point, I think that that's probably enough. And then the frame after, just make sure that there's a little bit of stretch. Not too much. By this point, you know, it should really, because it's not bouncing as high, so the pressure is becoming less. So let's just see how that feels. Yeah, so that feels about right. We probably wouldn't notice too much squash and stretch by the time we get to the end of this animation. Okay. And the first one, it feels like, you know, it might just be a little bit too big, that squash. So what I could do is just go back in, and it really is just a feeling. Okay. Now, for the next exercise, where you're going to be animating the ball bouncing around in an environment, you get to do whatever it is that you want this ball to do. But that's what's great about this exercise, is because now you've got a good understanding as to, you know, how much squash and stretch you would put on the ball depending on the speed in which it's traveled. If it's only just a couple of little bounces and there's really not much amplitude, then you just dial back on the squash and stretch. Okay, so just go ahead and add that layer in, and that's what we've done with this exercise. We've actually used a layering technique where we've just figured out the translation first, and then we've just added a little bit of polish to our animation so that it makes it a little bit more interesting. I'm just going to go through, because there's a couple of parts here. Yeah, it feels like the weight, I'm just going to hit this, it feels like some of the weighting on this could probably just be increased a little bit. So anyway, I can do that. I can do that later. But give that a try. Add a little bit of squash and stretch, and then towards the end, you know, you don't really need to worry too much about it. Great. And then also save this out as something new. Okay, give this a specific name. You know, call this ball squash and stretch or something like that, so that this has a unique name. Okay.